Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Victoria LeBeau. I'm a national program leader here at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture in the Division of Community and Education. And today I'm going to be talking about your appointment as a panel manager and what your role is during the panel. So we're going to go ahead and transition to the presentation. And I'm going to start by explaining basically what happens at your appointment. By this point, you should have already completed the majority of your paperwork and you're ready to actually get started working. If you're a returning panel manager, please make sure that you have done your ethics form disclosure that does need to be updated every year. But once all that is done, you're ready to get started. If you have any questions about whether or not all your forms are completed, you can ask your program leader and they will work with their team to make sure that they have everything that they need. So once you're onboarded, we can really get started on what you actually will do. So your role during the panel is to co-chair the panel meeting with your national program leader, but you really are the primary chair. Now, every program leader likes to have a different type of partnership with their panel manager. So they will be working closely with you so that you all can decide who will take on what task. But overall, you are the impartial facilitator during the panel meeting. You can certainly ask questions, you can certainly help to clarify things during the panel, but it really is your job to make sure that you never appear to like or dislike a proposal. Also, it's your job during the panel to kind of moderate the discussion. Make sure that everybody gets the right amount of time to speak. Make sure that you don't have some panelists who are dominating the discussion throughout the panel or other panelists who are too reticent during the panel. So you want to make sure that everybody gets the right amount of time and that you maintain a good flow through the panel, and you and your MPL will work on this together. Additionally, your role along with the MPL will be to make sure that any conflicts of interest or out of the room or otherwise excluded from the virtual discussion during the panel. It'll be your job to make sure that you're maintaining a good pace and staying on time so that you finish in time, but also that every proposal gets the same amount of time discussed, more or less. So you don't want to spend just 5 minutes on some proposals and then 2 or 3 schools get tons of time, 20 minutes. So you want to make sure that everybody gets a balanced amount of time when you're discussing proposals as a group. And then also, we would encourage you throughout the panel discussion as the panel manager to be taking notes, particularly if there are sticky issues, if there are things people need to go back and reread, if there are questions about something in the RFA and it needs a little bit more research than what can be answered on the spot. Note these things down so that you can address them during breaks or in between days, or that it's something that you and the MPL may need to talk about between sessions. So just keep that in mind. Also, because most programs do have an end of panel re-ranking period that we're going to discuss later, these notes will help you in case there is a particular conflict during the re-ranking. You'll have notes on, hey, these were the major issues between these 2 proposals. So take notes the best that you can. So you'll be very busy during the panel, but you and your MPL will work out how to tag team those roles. So for the most part, most panels will begin with the panelist orientation so that everybody's really on the same page. Most MPLs and their panel managers will work together to send out instructions before the panel. Some will do a pre-panel webinar. Some might do an in-person orientation at the start of the meeting. And then others might do even a night before discussion if they're here in person in DC. But overall, the orientation will help everybody be reminded about the confidentiality expectations for the panel, expectations for what happens if you're a COI, reminding everyone that they will be asked to leave the room or be excluded from the discussion. Some insight that you can share and or your MPO will share about what implicit bias is and how to minimize that during the panel meeting. And then just overall, an overview of the panel process, what order you'll be discussing your proposals in, what your review criteria are that need to be followed, and any other guidance that you want to give your panel at the start of the meeting. So again, some MPLs may do the orientation, or you may team lead the orientation with your MPL, but this is something that we encourage you to do at the beginning of your panel meeting so that everybody's on the same page. Just to highlight a couple of changes that have happened for the upcoming year is that there was one major change for the competitive program applications, and that is that all of our competitive programs will be required to ask for a data management plan in their applications. So we're just flagging this for your attention, particularly if you're very familiar with our programs. This may be very new to you, and your panelists may ask you, what is this? Where does this come from? Do we have to review this? It should definitely be reviewed and considered as part of the evaluation process in terms of, is their data management plan suitable? Is it appropriate for the project? Is it clearly described, and is it feasible? And this information will be included in the request for applications or the RFA for the program, and your MPL can also provide additional guidance. Okay, on to the panel process. This is where you're going to instruct your panel about the flow of the order of discussion and how projects will be discussed and evaluated. So most often you will go in proposal order number, but not always. Again, you'll want to work this out with your panel, your MPL ahead of time. For some, it might be that you have different buckets. So you might evaluate maybe all the research proposals first and separately from all the integrated grant proposals or something like that. So you'll need to work this out with your MPL ahead of time and let the panel know ahead of time so that they can be prepared and be ready to follow along. Particularly for AFRI, the research and integrated projects are reviewed separately. Some other programs may review research, education, and extension projects separately. And then strengthening proposals in AFRI, seed strengthening, equipment strengthening, or sabbatical proposals are reviewed separately. So just make sure that you're aware of that and ready to work that out with your MPL. I personally like to share a list of the order so that everybody can follow along. And so this is something that you can create as a resource for your panel if needed. Also, you may use the streamlining approach to your panel. And essentially what this is, it's a way to ensure that the majority of the time in panel discussion is spent on those proposals that have the highest chance of getting funded. So it's an opportunity for those proposals that have very low scores across the board, consistently low from those who have individually reviewed those proposals, to not be discussed in the panel meeting. And so you and the MPL will come up with a recommended list for, or a nomination list for which proposals could be streamlined, and you'll share this list with your panel at the beginning of your panel meeting. Once you share that list, do know that anyone can request that that proposal be brought out of the streamlining procedure and discussed. It's just a suggestion to help you all stay on time, particularly for those programs that have a high number of proposals received. So if your MPL suggests something for triage, but you think it really should be discussed, that can happen. And any panelists can request that something be discussed and pulled out of triage. And you only need one person to want to discuss it to pull it out of triage. It doesn't have to be panel majority. Some proposals are not streamlined ever, and those are minority serving institution proposals and any other that AFRI strengthening proposals such as seed proposals, sabbatical proposals, equipment proposals. And then also proposals where the scores are not consistent. So if you have you might have an excellent, a very good, and then two poors, that proposal should probably be discussed because there's a lot of contention and everybody doesn't agree. If something is streamlined, note that since you're not having a panel discussion, there's not going to be a panel summary. That is, people are not going to be able to write and take notes on the discussion because there wasn't any discussion. And then it also naturally will be placed in the low ranking category. It can't be an outstanding or high or medium priority proposal if it was low enough to be streamlined. If you have any questions about this, again, your MPL can provide clarification. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're ensuring that everybody's proposal is being evaluated fairly. So the way to do this that we recommend is to make sure that you are very, very clear on the evaluation criteria. If you have questions about the criteria, ask your MPL ahead of time. This is not the discussion that you want to have with your MPL when you are in DC. This is something that you want to be reading the RFA as soon as you're appointed as a panel manager and know that program very, very thoroughly so that you can ask any questions that you have early and then be prepared to answer your panelist questions. But make sure you know the review criteria, and then essentially most programs will go in order. Once you come to panel and something's called up to be ready to be discussed, you'll have a first person who will go over some of the basics of the proposal, what it's about, how much money they're requesting, some of this basic information. They'll add their strengths and weaknesses that they thought, and then you'll go to the second reviewer on that proposal, then the third reviewer on that proposal, and then if you have a fourth or a reader proposal. So you'll go in order, and then you'll open up discussion to the rest of the panel. Some programs may have more than 3 or 4 panelists. It just kind of depends, but you tend to go in order. And quite often that first person who's discussing it, they might take a little bit more time. And then as you go down the line from second to third to fourth, they should only be adding comments that nobody has mentioned before. So I often encourage my second, third, and fourth panelists that feel free to say nothing further to add. It just keeps everybody on track. So be mindful of that. That will definitely be your role as a panel manager, to make sure that people are only adding pertinent points and then contradictory points, so that everybody's just not rehashing their entire review over and over again. But once those who have actually read the proposal have a chance to speak, then you'll open it up for the entire group. And then again, make sure that you're moderating time and giving each proposal about the same amount of time. You'll also need to work out with your MPL ahead of time who is going to actually create the written review summary, and also who is going to discuss, if included, information, if it's a resubmission, any updates, any ad hoc reviews. Just kind of work this out with your MPL ahead of time and have a plan. Also, you're going to need to know which person is the scribe, explain to them how to get into the report system and create their panel summary. This is things that all should be covered in the orientation, so that once you're in panel, you have a really clear flow and you're able to get through these proposals. The panel summaries that you're asking the panel to write should include really a synthesis of the discussion. It is not a rehashing of the individual reviews. I often will have people literally copy and paste their individual reviews into the panel summary, and that is not necessary, because the applicants receive their individual reviews a lot of times as well as the panel summary, so we don't need to rehash all of that. They just need to focus on the positive and negative aspects from the discussion, as well as any synthesis comments. Synthesis comments can be things like, innovative idea would encourage resubmission or something like that. The summary again should reflect the entire panel discussion, and to the extent possible, the consensus opinion of the panel. You might have a situation where your panel hasn't reached consensus, but then the summary should just reflect that half of the panel really felt strongly that this was an issue, but half of the panel felt this. Whatever takes place in the discussion, that should be captured in the summary. Please remind your panelists that all the reviewers will contribute to the summary. You have one person who writes it, but then every other reviewer attached to that proposal has a chance to go into the report system, edit it, add their comments, do any changes that they need, and then it will go back to the initial writer, and they can have a final look at the summary. We encourage you, working with your MPL, to give the panelists an example of what a well-written summary looks like. If you want one of these, your MPL can provide one. And then oftentimes we will ask you as panel manager to review and edit the panel summary before the MPL does it, so that we have a 2-layer review. So you're looking for grammar, you're looking for inappropriate comments, those comments like the last day when people are very frustrated and maybe they say something is stupid. That's not very necessary, and it's not very helpful to the applicant. So you're looking for those kind of red flags. So you'll be asked to review those, and then of course the MPL will also do a final review. Again, I'm making sure that proposals are evaluated fairly. Once you have discussed all of the proposals that are up for discussion, then you're going to go ahead and work on your ranking. After discussion of each proposal, proposals are normally placed in a ranking category. So this might vary from AFRI programs to non-AFRI programs, but for the most part, there's going to be a low, medium, high, and outstanding ranking categories. We do have specific definitions of what each of those categories mean. You should be provided this information, and you definitely want to share that with the panelists. But essentially, you want to encourage the panel to put it in the best ranking category they can at the beginning. But then at the end, after you discuss all the proposals, most programs will do a re-ranking process. This is where you go back and just make sure that everything is in the correct ranking category, and also balance out any biases that may have come just because a proposal was the very first one, so maybe it got ranked a little bit lower. Maybe some of your later proposals, once you have more information, they might have a different rating as well. So you want to be able to balance out all the rankings. So typically what folks will do is start and go one category at a time and say, is there anything in the low category that you want to move out of low? Is there anything in the medium category that you want to move out of medium, and so on? And then you will do a final re-ranking for those proposals that have a chance of getting funded. The MPL can work with you to decide what percentage of proposals that is. It might be the top 10% or top 20% of proposals that you will re-rank, and make sure that those are in the exact order that you want, so that your number one proposal is absolutely the best proposal that you all received that year. And you'll likely spend a lot of time right around your funding line to make sure that if something is just below the funding line, that you make sure that that's where it needs to be. So that's the purpose of the re-ranking, to make sure that you're looking at priorities, and you're looking at like any issues that came up over the course of the panel can get smoothed out during your re-ranking process. So after you re-ranking, you have that exact order, your panel is finished. What you will do at that point is really work with your MPL, and if you're here in person, this will likely be after you fly back home, but you'll work together on what your final recommendations will be. Panel recommendations are advisory, meaning that this is the recommendation of the panel. It's not necessarily set in stone, but here at NIFA, it is very, very rare that there can be some justification for skipping over a high rank proposal to get to something beneath. Most of the time, if that happens, it might be a situation where there is a legislative mandate, like our AFRI phase funding, where we can go below the funding line to fund some proposals. But for the most part, we really fund in the order of the panel recommendations. That's why it's really hard for you to, that's why it's really important for you to make sure that the ranking process and the discussion process is as fair as possible. But the MPL will need to do some background work to make sure that we're not funding duplicative projects, to make sure that there wasn't anything we missed in screening, like make sure that all the proposals are really eligible and some of that background work. And then they will work with you to determine recommended award sizes. Sometimes the panel will love a project, think it's super innovative, but that the budget will need some revisions, or there might be other suggestions that the panel recommended, and you'll have notes on a lot of those things, and it will be included in the panel summary. So you'll work together on that, but you'll come up with that final recommendation list, and it will be presented to our leadership for approval. And if there are any questions, the leadership can ask at that time. If you're available, many program leaders will ask that you join that discussion by teleconference. And then you're almost done. So the very last thing that you're asked to do is create the panel manager report, which is just 2 to 3 pages. And you have several weeks, most within 6 weeks. Some might be a little shorter, just depending on when they need their awards to get made. But it's your thoughts and opinions, and what would you suggest to us for the RFA, for emerging areas of science, for the process itself, hot topics, anything that the panel was very interested in seeing funded in the future. A lot of times, if you have time at the end of the panel meeting, that will be a good opportunity to gather some of this feedback from your panelists. But all of those things, if you can condense them down into a 2 to 3 page report, even recommendations that we can share with future panel managers, it will really help us to keep improving the process for the future. So that's pretty much all I have. I really encourage you, if you have questions, to check with your national program leader. We're going to transition away from the PowerPoint now. Thank you for your time and attention. Again, my name is Dr. Victoria LeBeau. You're welcome to contact me directly if needed, or your program leader if you have any questions. My name is Dr. Victoria LeBeau. You're welcome to contact me directly if needed, or your program leader if you have any questions.